I would just like to say thank you, everybody, for a wonderful weekend here at Manchester. We're about to start our last panel of the festival. Your moderator is Mika Jarrett, entertainment attorney from Boston. Mika, thank you.
So this is going to be a slightly unconventional final panel, and I hope that that is how it turns out. We have to the left of me Bobby Farrelly, who is a writer-director that some of you may have known. Leslie Gerso, who is a TV personality and chef. And I hope to God I say this next one right, Sarah Boulou. Sarah Boulou. Hold on. She has been on TED Talk, and she is an expert on the truth of sexual violence. Okay? A frequent and long-term friend and business partner, Stephen Adams, who is a manager-producer with Buffalo 8. And finally, Thea Dunlap of Dunlap Pictures out of New York.
Park Pictures. Sorry, Park.
Park Pictures. Almost nailed it, but okay. We're going to be opening this up first with a few words from Bobby, because he is the only one on the stage that has personally met and done business with the elephant in the room.
Let me tell you what I know about Harvey Firestein. Got the wrong Harvey? Oh. You know, typically, as a guy who writes comedy, the first thing that I want to say is something to make people laugh. And with this particular case, with Harvey, and I've worked with him, you know, I can't even joke about it because, of course, everybody would think I'm taking lightly with this just horrible, horrible situation. And it is horrible. And I've known Harvey for a long time. We worked with him. My brother Peter and I made a movie with the director, Michael Corretti, called Outside Providence, and we ended up selling it to Miramax, and Harvey came on, and, you know, we worked with him for a long time. And I knew him as a big personality and, you know, very charismatic for sure. Maybe a bit of a bully. You know, he's going to get his own way. I thought of him as a very smart guy. But I'll be honest with you, as a person in the business, I had no idea that he would have been doing any of the things that we found out in the last week or two. And I've had people ask me, you know, all throughout my career, and then I live on the East Coast, like, what are those Hollywood people like? What are those Hollywood people like? And honestly, like, most of the people I know in my time out in Hollywood and making movies are really nice people. And there's a few people that are, you know, what you call bullies or something, and maybe they're doing that too, but I'm surprised. I am. I don't know that side of the business. I don't. I thought the casting couch was like, I just didn't really think that was actually happening, but apparently I was wrong. So, you know, shame on me. But I think it's just a horrible thing, but I hope that, you know, it's probably not the last guy either. I think there's going to be a feeding frenzy, and they're going to come out with some more guys that are doing similar things, unfortunately. And but I'm just appalled by it. It's sad. So hopefully we can just clean it up and move on, because I like to make movies and I don't like to harass or abuse or do anything like that to anyone.
So I want to quote Marilyn Monroe. She said, "Hollywood is an uncrowded brothel, a merry-go-round with beds for horses." Okay? This has been going on forever. And so what I really want to get down to here is, how many people in this room has ever been a victim of sexual harassment or bullying in the workplace or witnessed it? And I'm standing up. A lot of people. How many people have had that happen more than 5 times? Okay. So this is what we're here to talk about today, and we're here to look at the solution. We have enough stories that we can go on Deadline and Hollywood Reporter and Variety, and we can see everybody who now come out of the closet in a slightly different way than we used to use that term. For something that we've all known, it's the best kept secret in Hollywood. Everybody knows it goes on and stuff. Everybody knew Harvey was a bully.
All right, no, a bully,
Everybody
yes.
knew he was a bully.
Right, but that's not, that's different than a sexual predator.
Yeah, so it is different, but it is all part of the same conversation. And how do we change this in an industry that doesn't just have 5 or 6 companies that we all work for, which is most companies in the world, or most industries in the world? We're an industry of lots of little companies and a few big ones and a whole mess of middle-range ones. So how do we deal with that? And that's what we're going to hear to discuss. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my panel. I do believe that Bobby needs to take off.
Unfortunately, I wanted to weigh in because I had worked with Harvey, and I did know him, and I just wanted to, tell you what I knew, and I don't know if it's helpful or not, but I have another event that I head to today at the festival too, so I'm going to move on, but
We appreciate the time.
important things that you're talking about.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Really. So Sarah, I'm going to start with you.
Sure.
You hear about this through many industries. Is this a common situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is common. And just a little bit of background about me. So basically, I come to this work as a strategic communications expert, also as a survivor of child sexual abuse and date rape myself. And what that did for me is it really kind of sparked my interest. I became a rape crisis center volunteer. I was a crisis counselor for a long time. I served on a board of a rape crisis center. And then I really spent, probably about 2 or 3 years interviewing mostly men about why they were so quiet about sexual violence. And so I originally thought that it was because they were defensive, right? Or they were complicit with the abusers. And what I learned is that most men have extremely wonderful hearts, and they are afraid of what to say. They don't know if they're going to say the right thing. They're afraid they're going to get it wrong. But the dynamics that I'm seeing sort of unfold in the entertainment industry this week are not at all dissimilar than the dynamics that I've seen. Just a few weeks ago, there was a big brouhaha about sexual harassment and violence in the Venture Capital Association. And I think similarly, they pulled their group together for what was a little bit of an uncomfortable conversation, a little kind of a, wow, this happens in our community too. And so, I think that sort of like aha moment of this happens in our community is exactly where we all need to start. Having some conversations about imagining what a world could be like without it is also incredibly important, because we're here today because we have collectively accepted that it's okay for some people to be sexually abused or assaulted.
And that is exactly the mythology of the audition couch, that you're supposed to go in and we're all supposed to go through this rite of passage on some level, and it's not just for talent and actors, but almost everybody. So I want to next ask Stephen Adams about that. You're a producer, a manager, and you were talent when you were younger as well.
Well, I think that the thing that surprised me when I first got to Los Angeles was that how, in many ways, the studio system seemed to be this repository of a very old-fashioned attitude, and you saw that during the Sony leaks. The mindset of the sort of communication that was going on could have been 100 years ago. It's sort of rough, disrespectful but kind of funny talk is kind of the norm, and these genetics need to change. And nobody's ever really confronted that on a massive level. I think the technology is doing all sorts of crazy things very quickly to knock the stuffing out of that kind of thinking. But we did kind of all just accept the fact that that was the way things were. And what I did what I was always taught as a talent advocate was that we had to protect our clients from something that we understood was always out there. But nobody ever said, maybe we should try to stop it, because we just understood it to be the way things were.
And we talked about, the sexual predator, but it's far more than that. There's an entire culture that sexualizes everything we do in this business. And I'm reminded of something Thea said when we were all meeting earlier. It's the corporate environment, and I hear this from friends in every industry, from finance to legal, where there's far more men at the top than women, and when you rise to the top, you're kind of stuck in this situation. You want to talk a little bit about that, Thea?
Just a balance of power. That's, I guess, David Foster Wallace, I'm sure. He has this, he told a story, I think, at a graduation where he said, you know, there's these fish and they're swimming along and they pass another fish and one fish says, it's in this great water we're swimming in. And, you know, the one fish turns to the other and says, what's water? It's just that it's so the way it is that, you know, you need to sort of laugh at jokes and you need to chill out and it's, you know, some of it's to be expected. It's just that it is the norm. And so for myself and other women in the industry, we have sort of learned to come together and use each other to talk about those things. But again, like in our conversation this morning, for me and for the other the other female producers that I work with, it's really hard to speak up because if there's only one or two of us, and there's mostly men at the top, if you become the one who speaks up and says, I really didn't appreciate that comment, I mean, you're upsetting the status quo and you won't get invited to drinks afterward. You're not going to be included in that fun thing that, you know, everyone else is going to go do after we wrap. If you're a problem or if you're so uptight, or it just becomes, you learn to adapt so you can be included. And so sometimes that means you laugh along as well and you go places and see things and participate in a way because you don't want to be left out, but you're not necessarily thinking this is so great. But there's repercussions for speaking up and it's not, I don't think that it's not like a Harvey thing where they're saying you'll never work in this town again. It's just that, wow, she's really sensitive.
So it's at all levels. It goes from top to bottom, and it's not necessarily getting you alone in a hotel room. It's just the fact that you don't get invited to the table to have the conversation in the first place.
Because the table's full of men, typically. If the table were full of women, I'm pretty sure I could speak up and...
So from a legal perspective, what some of you may or may not recall was there was a landmark decision in the 1970s, early 70s, of a restaurant called Hurley in New York that didn't let women eat there. And it was an old boys club. And they said we should be able to have the places and smoke our cigars and have our conversation. And it was the landmark decision that led to Title IX, ultimately, that the Supreme Court said, no, you can't segregate here. You can't ostracize women who are in the corporate environment and do your deals without them there and have your social hour. You're not allowed to do it. So here we are 40 years later and we're having the same conversation again and nothing's changed. So Leslie, you were an actress, you know, going back to your teens and went on many, many auditions. And what was that experience like?
It can be very uncomfortable. And look, there are good people in this industry too, but this is not, I mean, it happened all the time. It happened all the time.
And if it happened, what would you have done? What was your next step?
Luckily, I have an Italian-Sicilian family, and I never let sexual harassment turn into sexual assault, or I was never put in a position that had to happen. But I would say at least on a monthly basis, that would happen. And I remember the very first time that it happened, I was a teenager, and it wasn't cool, and I didn't know who to tell or what to do. I wasn't going to tell my parents because then I'd be out of the industry forever. And then I told my agent that I just didn't want the job. I'd already gotten it. And she said, did something happen? And I said, well, yeah, something happened. And so she pulled me off the job, but somebody else got that job. And you never know what happened to them. And so it's a cycle that needs to be broken, and I don't know how to break it, but I'm so happy that we're talking about it.
So, you know, one of the things Leslie mentioned to me, you know, off stage earlier is that you say no to the job and there's 100 other girls waiting for the job, but you're sending them into the lion's den knowing full well the agent is happy to do that. She'll happily protect you and, you know, to protect you in that moment, but will happily send her next client that doesn't complain in for it. So now let's talk about solutions. Why don't you get us started with that, Sarah?
Well, I mean, I think it's fine. Well, the first thing that I also wanted to say is that I know that just sort of here and there, kind of through this conversation, that there are some personal stories that are coming up, and that even just talking about this topic, if you have experienced sexual violence at some point in your life, it can feel very emotional. So we just, as panelists, wanted to make sure that we let you know that if you need to get up and take a break and go get a glass of water or excuse yourself, that nobody's going to think you're rude or that you don't care about the issue of sexual violence, which is why you're leaving. So that goes for men, women, everybody. So I just wanted to first say that it's take care of yourself first, and that's the most important thing. But then, what we were talking about earlier is what if we could kind of collectively imagine a world where sexual violence didn't take place, right? So it's like, so what would that world look like? What would happen before a casting call, right? So it's, so maybe you sit down with your agent for the first time, and your agent, who's been trained on, unconscious bias, who's been trained on sexual violence, and says, listen, I want you to know that there is no role that you should take that is worth your dignity or respect, and if anybody ever touches you in the wrong way, I want to know about it first, right? So that's the conversation, So then, so her agent's not going to really be able to control what happens, right? Because there's creeps that are out there, solution in my mind does not mean we're going to sort of eliminate the world from violence. I think that's probably not happening in my lifetime, at least. So I just want to be practical about kind of what we can do about it.
But a solution is not going to the hotel room for the audition and questioning that.
And the agent should be questioning.
And the agent should have
The agent should say, no. Right, yeah, exactly. It's like, look in the mirror. No, I'm not going to the hotel room. Gosh, if something happens, then I'm actually going to call all of the other agents, and there's going to be nobody that's going to want to audition for that role.
And by the way, I will say that people like me do that.
Yeah.
We don't, with my female clients, I always tell them, and actually I shouldn't say female because honestly,
You tell female.
this actually cuts across gender as well. Because there are predatory women and predatory men, and they cross all boundaries.
Absolutely.
So let's make that clear. I tell all my clients that if anything seems strange, I do not want them to remain. If your instincts are telling you something, you pay attention. Because we are taught so often to dumb down what we feel, yet our bodies are telling us absolutely not to cross that threshold. And we do it anyway, because we want the golden prize that's over there, and
Right.
we dumb down the very thing that's put into our bodies and our minds to protect ourselves. So I tell them, if you feel that way, you call me, you tell me, you get the hell out of there. Nothing's worth, as you're saying, nothing's worth putting yourself at risk or being degraded because you want a bloody job. And you've got to start seeing Hollywood in a bit of a better perspective. I think there's also this thinking that goes on where it's done at any cost, whatever that may be. And I think that's another unconscious thing that we kind of have just sort of all accepted for 100 years, that I'll do whatever it takes. I'll exhaust myself. I will sleep with that person. I will hold my nose and let that happen because I want this so badly. And I think that you don't realize you're shipping away your soul as you're going to do that. And I think that we've got to also teach people to take some responsibility in that area.
But it's from a corporate perspective, right? It's, sort of a corporate perspective can control their culture and environment.
Right.
So there sort of are things that are, whether it's things you say or don't say, policies you have or don't have, that it's this is how things are done here, right? And so, so how do you apply that to an industry? So the other thing that we were talking about is, sort of what if at the beginning of a production, your producer brings everybody together and says, we are all going to have a workshop on X, Y, or Z. Listen, we're going to be on location. Consensual hookups are great. We want to make sure you understand what consent means, because I'm pretty sure your campus didn't teach it to you. So we're going to do a consent workshop all together. So great, consenting adults can do whatever they want, right? But we're going to make sure that we understand that, on this production, there's a certain way of doing things. There's a certain set of things that I want to know about. If I hear about them happening, you're gone. So, it's just a different way of setting a standard, right? Whereas right now, it's kind of well, we're not going to talk about it. If it does happen, we're not going to talk about it. If it happens, it's the person who it happened to, they probably did something wrong to deserve it. And so it's just, that's not the way you go about things, but it's kind of, this all starts with being the one to just take a deep breath and have an uncomfortable conversation before something uncomfortable happens.
So training is interesting, and one of the things we talked about on the third with Thea on this is unions, getting the unions involved to be kind of the gatekeeper to help with this.
Well, unions can certainly help. I would just encourage anyone who's in a union to talk to your union. They should be advocating for you and really helping. But I think one thing that we talked about earlier that was really helpful, and maybe this could be a union thing, I'm not sure, but if you're not in a big company, you're not in a studio or someplace that explicitly has HR that is there, for you and for them, and you have those avenues, having a conversation at, let's say, the beginning of a production and saying, if there's any issues with this, feel free to talk to whomever, but also we want to designate this person as someone that you can absolutely come to. At least saying that we're aware that this might happen to you, and or this is a potential issue, and so we're priming everyone to please be on their best behavior. And if you have an issue, identify who you can come and talk to, because without an HR, a lot of productions, a lot of the smaller productions, and what I do, there's no HR.
HR isn't the end all be all.
No, I know, but identifying people who are upset, I'm standing here saying, I'll be the person that you want. If you have an issue, you come talk to me.
Right. But also just like casually, you can at any level of any production casually ask, so when are we doing the unconscious bias training? It's like, that's how you normalize something, right? Where it's like, I didn't see you guys post anything about harassment policy anywhere. Like, where should I be looking for that? It's just as though of course you would do that. Like, what kind of person are you?
No, it's a very good point in making people think about that. And then we get to the other issue is that, there have been a lot of lawyers here this week, a lot of us entertainment attorneys. And people ask us about how do we do the legals on our projects, but this is another aspect of that. And what I find is that producers, talent, all the independents out there, you don't have, $100,000 to bring a criminal, go criminal, get a civil lawyer to file charges. But there are resources out there. There is legal services and things like that in your own hometown. So talking a little bit about how to document this. What do you do as soon as it happens? As soon as it happens, you pull out a notebook and you write everything down as soon as you get home, okay? That's the first thing, and you date it. The second thing you do is you call someone that's trusted, okay, and you let them know instantly. That's been a big factor with taking down the elephant in this situation, is that a lot of people did call other people who could verify what happened to them right around the time that it happened. So then you get that factor going. And then you sit down with someone who, maybe has a good legal or business perspective and says, what should my next steps be? Okay, and keep documenting that way. Another thing that I know, Sarah, you brought up earlier today was a registry that is being used now on college campuses and in the military.
Yeah, so there's an organization called Callisto that has actually developed an online reporting system that's being used it's being piloted on like 14 college campuses right now. And basically what it does is it allows you to create a time-stamped report of a sexual assault, and then as the survivor, because I think, sort of as you're talking, Binka, is that yes, sort of document those things, but also there's, no right or wrong reason to go public, and there's no right or wrong way to do it. So it's sort of as like whatever's going to be the best decision for you as the person that it happened to. But what this system does is it allows you to say, enter all of the information about what happened, including the perpetrator's name, and then be notified if somebody else files a complaint on that same perpetrator. And then maybe at that point you might say, well, I don't want to report it officially right now. I want to be anonymous, but maybe I would if something happened to somebody else, or maybe I would be willing to testify on somebody else's behalf. Or and so it's it's a system that is out there, and like any systems, they are actually a nonprofit organization doing this incredible work, despite the fact that I keep telling them not to be a nonprofit organization. But it's like to think about using something like that from an industry perspective, would be right. Yeah, it's like
I want to bring it back to Leslie now. Okay, so now we're in the perfect world where this doesn't happen normally, and everybody's going to do what they're supposed to. What's your perfect vision of that?
My perfect vision of it is that there is support there, and I'm not quite sure what that means, because even after all these years later and not really being in Hollywood anymore, I still don't talk about these things, and I still don't really feel comfortable saying these people's names. And so I don't know what you need to do to make people comfortable doing that, and how we do that. And this is an open conversation for everyone to answer, because I don't have the answer. And especially when you're young and you're up and coming and you want this so bad, like you said, how badly do you want this? That is so often a question that is asked.
Always.
That's always like the first lead in by a producer or director or casting, somebody that wants to be inappropriate, is how badly do you want this part? And it's a simple question, and you could say, I'll do anything for it. You could say, not that badly. You can say whatever you want, but the meaning behind that question is what is going to be the next thing said.
And you could change the response completely and say, I'm the best person for the part. And that's it. And turn it back on them and let them make the next decision. Okay? You're going to lose the best person for the part or the best person for the job that you're going to take. And instead of letting them have that power over you, change the question on them. Don't respond to the question that you don't need to ask.
And I wish I had that confidence when I was 22 years old.
And if you do, and even if you say, I want this part so badly, it does not give somebody the right to take your clothes off and have sex with you. It is never, no matter what, it is never the victim's fault for being harassed or assaulted. And so, so I think it's a both and, right? Is the sort of how do we build the kinds of conversations that, that are necessary to identify the people who really mean that question of like, you gonna like stay up all night, like, practicing and like learning your lines, or like, are you going to sleep with me? And
right.
so it's how can we kind of how can we make that person feel wrong for asking the question instead of making the person who doesn't have the power feel wrong for having the answer.
I also think, and this is something that you all can implement when you're putting together your projects, please don't have meetings and cast people one-on-one, especially when it's a man and woman. And it's known in our industry, we have a lot of meetings at hotel restaurants, and I don't know why it's hotel restaurants more so than regular restaurants, but if I'm going to meet a male producer or a male director, it can make me weary of even going to the meeting if I know that it's just the two of us. So why don't you just take that off the table and say, we're going to be meeting with so-and-so, so-and-so, and so-and-so, and make it a group meeting instead of a one-on-one.
That's a really good practical
Very, very
suggestion.
good point. But I wanted to turn the conversation a little bit about the impact that this is all having on the industry as a whole. Because I really think we're not talking about that enough. We're watching one of the biggest champions of true alternative content and distribution in television and film is about to go under. It's going to disintegrate. And already thousands of people have lost their jobs in this industry because we've all had the visceral gut reaction, which my personal theory is we all think we're doing this to the guy that's pretending to be our president right now, and unfortunately, Weinstein, who is absolutely the bad guy and deserves to be taken down, all of our passion is going into that because we want it to be the other guy as well. That's my personal theory. But beyond that, let's talk a little bit about the repercussions to an industry that doesn't have a lot of alternative distribution outlet right now, and I'm gonna first put that to Thea.
It's a tough industry, and I do know that it takes so many people, obviously, to make a film or do television. And I mean, Weinstein the company itself has had some issues in terms of their own success. So I don't really know too much about what may not be happening now for Weinstein and their product, if you will. I don't know. I don't like rewarding good or bad behavior, but also at the same time, I don't know. I'm not sure that I actually.
Okay, I'm gonna put it over to Steve.
Well, no, I'm thinking about this too. I mean, there are definitely repercussions. I mean, it's always that question of separating, say, for example, the artist from the art, and because he was a brilliant man, and there's no arguing that. And he's created movements in this business that we're all benefiting from. So I think in many ways it might be why some of this was tolerated, and I think it's something that's still yet to sort of, the other shoe hasn't dropped yet, so it's kind of hard for me to take it beyond that point. I'm still pondering this. I'm watching this company sort of slowly get sucked down a drain, and it's sad, but these are the consequences, I guess, in a way.
And do we think that the warning that's been sent is going to be enough, or are we going to be yet another soundbite in history with another hurricane that replaces the media headline?
Well, I think that we're in a different era. I mean, we talked about this earlier. I mean, what is happening right now could not have happened 10 years ago. It could barely have happened 5 years ago. But things like this can happen now in a second. A tweet can change the course of the world now, as we know, quite literally. You know, that's another conversation altogether. But it's true. And this kind of information and this kind of collective response wasn't really possible until now. So I guess in a way it's a great blessing, because as we're saying, this is a culture that is 100 years old, that has always been very closed off. When I arrived, I won't say how long ago, but you know, Hollywood at that time was, you know, agencies and studios, not much more in between. You know, the indie world was being created at that point. And that was it. If you got inside one of those castles, it was quiet, it was silent, it was cut off, and people did whatever they wanted. I can tell you about a job interview I had without going into too much detail, but I was offered a job with a very powerful producer and his partner. And it was paying a tremendous amount, a six-figure sum to a 20-something kid. It was like, this seemed like a fortune. It was a fortune at that time. And they, you know, they said, basically the job is yours if you want it. And I said, well, what is the description? And they said, well, we travel the world, so we need an advanced man to go and arrive a week early. We want to know the best people. We want to go to the best restaurants. We want the best flowers. We want to meet the most, you know, the interesting artists. We want the best drugs. We want the best prostitutes. All delivered with the same value, and one is the other, like the mayor of Tokyo and this lady of the evening.
And you took it, right?
Of course I did. No, I decided that I wasn't worth selling my soul.
Yeah.
It certainly wasn't. But I have to be honest with you, I was tempted for a moment. And then I just realized that there was just absolutely no way that I could become this kind of a panderer. But that was, you know, the height of the business. This was like these major producers of Paramount that were the kings of Hollywood at that time. And that's how common that was, and they didn't hide it. Because these were the perks of being in that position.
They are the perks. Like, I just wanted to add to that this idea of this masculinity, which you talked about earlier, that for me, I and my fellow female producers, we feel a little tired of having to be the ones speaking up, a little tired of having to say, like how is this okay? And for me, it would just be so nice if men could just chime in, and I think a lot of it has to do with what we call this like masculine bravado. So like if you're a producer and you're flying around the world and you're getting, you know, prostitutes in different cities, you know, other men in the industry might be like, okay, I guess that's what we aspire to, this masculine notion of that's what it is to have made it. It's this like kind of crazy, you know, drugs and girls and that sort of thing. I would love if there wasn't an audience for that sort of thing anymore, you know, where suddenly people could say, that's actually not that cool, please don't talk about it.
Well, and Thea, I would challenge is that I actually think that most men think that's disgusting, but also at the same time frequently lack that practical skill to have the right kind of conversation at the right time without sort of feeling like their own power and masculinity is jeopardized. At least that sort of has been my experience. Like, so I'm also the founder of an organization called The Uncomfortable Conversation, which is sort of basically a set of tools directed towards men, mostly young men, to sort of help them learn to have the kinds of conversations. You know, and how do you find the language to intervene, right? Where it was like you were talking about the sort of like you're sitting around, you know, if you're sitting around and some like, you know, off-color joke is told, or it's like some guy to say like, dude, like, who are you, Harvey Weinstein? I mean, like, that could be like a lot of jokes, like forever now, right? It's like, listen, I don't want to lose any money, so can you not act like that? You know? So it's like, you know, so a lot of times it's just like making a joke about it, or sort of, it's like, and it's all like like these are all learned skills. That's what I'm saying. If you come from a man, it's better received. Exactly. But it's like, you know, but as we're having sort of lots of conversations about sort of like feminism and women and women's roles and all those things, which I think are like amazing, we need to be having the same level of excitement about having conversations about men and masculinity and how awesome men are, and like, you know, what power looks like when it's used for good, and like how strength is awesome, and how like sometimes you just want like a big giant bear hug, and like these are all great things, like, you know, and that you know, men can and they want to learn like how to have
too. I know men who in this culture sometimes feel a little disgusted, but they
some know
but
I think most men do not advocate any of this whatsoever. I would say that we're talking about a very powerful minority.
Yeah. Right.
But they have been rewarded and they have succeeded.
Absolutely.
And they have
But I think this goes to another point which I think we need to talk about as well, which is that we need to now start changing the gender balance in seats of power. if women aren't at the table, how can they affect this change?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I'll take
And
it.
need more seats, because it doesn't mean giving up your seat, just need more
Absolutely.
seats of power.
And you
Their
take-
power is endless and boundless, I have said.
But you take it to another level. What Thea said is that we are rewarding people within the industry, shall I say, with an Oscar when they were absolutely, accused predators. And we're making the President of the United States, who is an accused rapist, who admitted to paying off those people to make those cases go away. So we as a group, men and women, must work together to make sure this doesn't happen and that we educate each other on the sensitivity of these issues. Yeah? I think we should open it up a little bit to the audience and hear some of what
But
you
I want to
have
ask
to
you,
say.
I want to ask you a question though.
Sure.
Before we do that, can you define the difference between sexual violence, illegal, harassment, questionable, and then just what is distasteful? Because I think there's a lot of unclarity there.
Yeah, there is a lot of, there's actually a great article that if anybody missed it today, we can send it out to you. It actually went through all of the legal definitions, and one of the things it didn't do, unfortunately, is point out that it's different in every state of the country. So what's sexual violence here in Vermont is going to be very different from what's down in Mississippi, or Rwanda, or something like that. So there is no one definition, and there's also different levels of corporate rules from state to state as to what's appropriate and what not. So we do have Title IX. It does still exist. It could probably use a little bit of updating and modification at this point in time, because one of the things none of you can do when you go on an audition now is sue a company like the Weinsteins under Title IX because you're not an employee. So one little teeny line change in Title IX would say, no, when you offer an audition and somebody comes in for that, or for any conversation, they will have a quasi-employment status and they can sue you if you step over the bounds of something like that. But we don't have that now. So we have to fight for that legislation and we have to get it drafted. And hopefully this situation with the elephant will, now make us all have those conversations with the right people to get that kind of thing done. So
But for the general audience, just sort of like, so sexual violence, sexual contact without consent. So consent needs to be affirmative and freely given. Consent cannot be given if you are underage or if you are incapacitated. And sexual harassment can include sexual violence, but also create sort of anything that you do to create an environment in which somebody feels unsafe because of their gender or sexuality. Would you, lawyer, agree with me?
Yeah, I approve and support. So we have our first question.
First, thank you guys, because this conversation obviously is incredibly important and needs to be had. My takeaway, a little separately from, takeaway a lot, but my takeaway is that one thing that seems to be lost in some of these conversations is other groups, like the LGBTQ community, various minority subsets, and as somebody that's experienced it extremely, being born and raised in Southern California, living in LA most of his life, it happens more than it doesn't. Or I'll just say specifically for gay men. And it happens on a level of a Weinstein level. But it is something that might be passed around in a gossip way versus something in a real way. Something that then gets to have a conversation like this here with people that might actually start to manifest change.
So in your ideal world, kind of bringing it back to what Sarah started at the beginning, what would your solution be for a reporting process for something like that within the LGBT?
And I also just want to say thank you so much for raising that, because you are right, is that the rates of sexual violence are in fact much higher among LGBTQ populations. And so I have sort of lived that and breathed that so deeply that sometimes I forget to say it out loud. So that sort of when I say survivors, I mean men and women and trans, and that they are all equally important, and that we need to give marginalized voices more space. And so thank you for saying that.
Thank you. And I think I just want to quickly do the question, get back to what you said at the beginning, because you mentioned sexual harassment and bullying. And then I heard an working group, somebody said that it don't equate the same. And I have to completely disagree, because the bullying aspect versus sexual harassment I can't talk about anybody else, but in a personal level. The bullying of just belittling you because you might be effeminate and having to deliver an audition or how you deliver a pitch, and equating like your masculinity to be less than, or something based on your voice or tone or physicality, to me is just as harmful and detrimental as being sexually harassed. Even more so psychologically sometimes. Where's the fine line in that now in what we're talking about in this industry?
Well, I completely agree with you. I think they're equated. And there is a huge debate over that going on right now. And I've been shocked that the media isn't talking about the bullying aspect, because the one thing we all did know, which Bobby mentioned, was that he was a bully. There's no question that everybody knew that part. So the sexual harassment part, I think a lot of us knew about that too, but we didn't, that was more the quieter thing. But this is about power. This is about a power play between someone who can throw a stapler across the room and hit you in the head if you're their assistant. Legend did to have done it, and I know someone who told me they witnessed it, so I'm gonna have to believe that story. For me, berating someone in any way, shape, or form to get them to do what you want them to is a form of harassment. The sexual side of it is when you cross another line, yet another line. But it's all part of it, and I know you got something to say about that. Go ahead.
Well, I just to contribute to the conversation,
Yeah.
I don't think we can make this discussion about we should all be next to each other, because then it's diluting the message. So bullying is bad, being mean to each other is bad, but I don't think it's helpful to make that part of the discussion. I disagree. But back to what I consider on the table, which is sexual harassment. I think it's important for us all to realize that this moment is a really interesting one. It's not just about Harvey, but it's about Roy Price, who's been in the news a lot this last week. Also, 3 high-profile people at a partner production company and 2 very powerful agents have been dismissed within the last month. So, is this a turning point that's not just about Harvey, but about companies starting to realize that accepting this behavior is actually more damaging at the corporate level than tolerating it?
Yeah, and is it because we have a new generation, thank you millennials, coming in who won't accept this kind of behavior? And is that part of it?
I think there are people who might be really genuinely scared because they've been modeling themselves after some of these legendary bullies for so long, because that was what you aspired to sort of, not, I know I'm making a major generalization, but these are very successful people who, there are rumors, have done some pretty terrible things. They've gone through an assistant every month of their life, right? Like, well, why are they going through assistants? Because they're not very nice to them. But I hope, it is my hope generally, that people who maybe thought that this was an okay way to conduct themselves is to be a bit of a bully, to have that edge or whatever they may think it is, are realizing right now that this is a moving forward point, that this is, the line has been drawn, and it is no longer something that is going to get snickers and chuckles, and it's a really big deal. This industry is taking him down, and I think it's because a lot of people are so pissed about the situation that they've been in, and they just don't want this to be swept under the rug and move on. And my hope is that people will see Harvey and say, right, this was bad, and he's no longer this like larger than life figure.
Yeah. And I think the financial calculus is changing, right? So that if it, so, and that is happening, but at the same time, I think that just because there is the high volume of conversation doesn't necessarily mean we're having the right kinds of conversation that are going to lead to the long-term cultural change that impacts, I think, what both of you are talking about. And it's much less about being nice to each other. It's much more about having the right kinds of uncomfortable conversations, like learning things. So if I think of the opposite of rape culture, really, I hate that word rape culture, but it's, that it's a culture of empathy, connection, and safe and healthy boundaries, right? And so that, and you can roll your eyes if you want, but I can tell you that those are things that are learned, right? And so those are skills that people learn, through specific conversations with their parents, with their first grade teachers, with their, in their high schools. Like it's, and not everybody gets it. And if you don't get it, you don't get it.
yet. You still can learn how to behave.
So I've got a question over here.
Washington statement. During Bill Cosby's time, women were subjected to things that would seem normal at that time. Women subjected themselves to being objects. This time is different, but I'm wondering why now? Because we had, what's his name? Last name?
Woody Allen?
Woody Allen. Woody Allen molested children.
No, Woody Allen didn't molest
His daughter, I would say allegedly.
Woody Allen is accused, and the district attorney that wanted to prosecute him and wanted to nail him withdrew because there was simply no evidence. So
Right, and I can tell you as a victim of child abuse myself, these people are very cunning at hiding any evidence, because I was abused by someone who's very prominent in our neighborhood, and I never said anything. But then later, it came out that other children or girls were molested by the same person. The community was in an uproar. This is not true. I know this guy. He would never do anything like that. Until I told my mother, yes, he would, because he did it to me. He did it to me in my own house when my mother was at home. So I'm kind of on the side of the victim, because I know what it's like to be a victim, and I know that sexual predators can be very, very cunning at hiding. So I'm wondering why Hollywood is in such an uproar now, and they weren't during that time.
Yeah.
Well, that's a very good
Woody
question.
Allen was accused of
Yeah.
being
Well, I think
Leslie, what do you think about that?
I think that this has been going on since the beginning of Hollywood. I mean, Shirley Temple wrote in her biography that she had sexual abuse done to her at a studio when she was 12 years old. This isn't new, so I don't know why. I think Vinka was right. I think it's just ripe right now. I think the country is just kind of, in the media are hungry for a story like this, and so this is a case of timing. But it also is, it seems to be a lot of people that had an experience with him. Not that there aren't a lot with other celebrities that are out there as well, but this is like, you know, you've got when Angelina Jolie's coming forward, Gwyneth Paltrow's coming forward, Rose McGowan.
He's such a powerful man.
He is.
Such a powerful figure that you wouldn't think that this person, and a lot of people feel like, well, he can get anybody he wants. Why wouldn't we allow that? But these people don't want the easy route. This is about power. This is about control. And so why waste your time over here when you can go over here and get something that you can't get that's given to you all the time?
So in terms of timing, I mean, this is my take, and I'm going to take a question in a second, is that we're dealing with the social media that Steve mentioned before, and now when I sign a settlement agreement that says I ain't going to tell nobody, is that when I get really angry about having signed that and taken the money, I have a really easy place to go like this with and, you know, start outing it anyway. And that didn't exist 5 years ago. It just didn't exist. So that's why I think now. That's my personal, I don't know if I'm right, but we had
So, as a woman, I feel like a lot of women deal with it all the time. What's the best way to handle a situation, or for a man or a woman, where you're being assaulted or sexually harassed? And then a lot of the times, like me or my friends, we don't want to say something because we don't want to be connected to that or be known for that. Like, what's a way to like fix the situation without being connected to that situation?
Yeah, excellent question. I'm going to refer to Sarah.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm also, so I am here after this too, if you want to just have a one-on-one conversation about it that, you know, has some more specifics, but I think in general, there's nothing that anybody can ever do that makes what happens to them their fault, right? And so I think that's kind of the most important thing. You know, I think talking it over with somebody that you trust, right? You know, there are, you know, without knowing everything about you, right? That there are some, in some cases, some real safety issues or economic security issues that are involved with, you know, with being sexually harassed or assaulted. and that those are real. So my recommendation would be to look for your local rape crisis center. If you don't know what that is, the Rape, Abuse, and Incest Network has a national sexual assault hotline. You can start with them. They can make a referral for you locally. And just to remember that, that you'll make the decision that's right for you, and you'll figure it out as you go, right? But that it's not your fault that this happened to you, and however you're responding to it is totally normal. So if you're like, all right, well, I'm just gonna go back to work tomorrow, what can I do? That's normal.
But get yourself to safety. I mean, the first thing you do when you've been put into that corner, and I was really struck by the article last week by the woman that, that a Can had to escape from him, and he then gave her his hotel room in Cannes, and she got up and got out early in the morning, and he came back just like they predicted, to come after her a second time.
So do what you need to do to survive.
Right,
Do what
get
you need to
yourself
do to
out
survive.
of there as quickly as possible, no matter what you have to say, in order to make that happen. That's the first thing you're gonna do. Go ahead.
Thank you for having this panel. As a white straight male, and I say that because that is loaded with privilege, and I'm highly aware of that. And also being part of the group who perpetuates most of the assault, abuse, etc. What I think is the most important thing is I'm accountable to not only not participate in the discussion, but also call it out. And, I'm not saying I have participated as a young man in, locker room talk, and it gets to a point where it's not okay, it doesn't feel right. So I have to voice that. And that's something that's where the change is going to come, unfortunately, because what we're talking about here is what we do after the fact.
Right.
But this is systemic. This is not just Hollywood. This is the tech industry. This is politics. It's happened, and it's how we're raising our men. And as a father, I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, no, good point. Do we have any other? So I'll give my.
I just wanted to your point that social media has been a big part of the fact that the conversation is so important right now. Social media is also a big part in the belief that women are telling the truth. As a collective voice, on a personal story, I had an aha moment with my dad when the Cosby stories were coming out. We were sitting watching the news, and he was like, "Ooh, 30 women, so you think he did it?" And I was like, "One woman, I think he did it." And we had that moment where it was a teachable moment for my dad. Where I was like, what makes you think that a woman's voice isn't the truth? And I think, to your point, that social media has played a big part. It means that collectively we are raising to a larger voice, and that's why it's important now, because we're heard and we're believed.
I agree with you. The voices being able to be raised, but I also want to point out that we do still have something called due process in this country. Sure. And I will tell you that with the Cosby situation, for me, I come out on kind of like this tipsy-turvy, I'm not sure. Not that he didn't do something wrong, that I'm absolutely convinced of, but I also understand that there is also a witch hunt perspective of it. In fact, I made a documentary called Witch Hunt many years ago I worked on, which was exactly about this, about child molestation in Bakersfield, where it was a big lie, and they put 15 people away for a crime they'd never been accused of before, and 2 people died in prison, and it was all proven to be fake, that the DA had put the entire case together all based on made up stuff. So we have to be very careful when we're talking in social media. We're already talking about how the Russians are interfering and all of this other stuff. We don't know who the voices are speaking all the time in social media. We must be very careful that this collective voice that we're coming together is going in the right direction.
And I would take a little bit of just a different perspective on that, which is just that I think that, our justice system, just like every other system in our country, is really influenced by a lot of the myths and misperceptions that are out there about sexual assault and abuse, right? And so, if the first conversation you're having about sexual assault is like when you're on a jury, then that's like not a good process. That's not a fair process either for the accused or for the person, you know, or for the accuser. And so I think, you know, there are so many systems that would benefit from simply having, you know, like look in the mirror. Do I understand the definitions of sexual abuse and assault? Can I talk about consent? Do I understand how to respond to a disclosure of sexual violence in the right way? Am I a good friend or a partner to a survivor, right? And then look around you. Who can I have those conversations with? Can I have them with my siblings? Can I have them with my kids? Can I have them with my friends' kids, right? And then thinking about your own position of power and influence, right? Whoever you are, you have one, right? So it's like, so how are you using that to ensure that as many people as possible are getting the kind of education on this issue that we all really need?
Yeah, very good point. And then you raised the point of asking, you know, on production for the training that you need.
Yeah.
I mean, each one of us can do that and make sure that that happens. And maybe your production company, because it's an independent one, doesn't even know how to access this stuff. So if one of you want that to happen, hand them the research and say, here, do this, and it doesn't cost much. You know, let's make that all happen together. Final question? Okay, one more.
I just had a thought, and I just want to say out to this community that we're talking about Hollywood, we're talking about big power, and many of us are involved in very small, low-budget films. Like, hey, let's go to our college and make a film, and it's happening there too. And so I think we can also take this conversation back home to our smaller community. And have the conversation with all of these young people that we are working with as well. So it's not just, I just want to say, it's not just Hollywood, it's everywhere.
It's across all industries and big, small, and it's not just men and women. Like, it really is, like you had said earlier, it's being sexually assaulted or intimidated. It happens men to women, women to men, men to men, women to women. It's just, so I just want to make sure we cover it.
Yeah, and I just want to end with your gut tells you when you're in a situation that you don't want to be in. And just listen to it, because no job is worth it, no situation is worth it. And ask too, even if you're in that meeting and you're uncomfortable, say like, hey, is your assistant out there? Bring somebody else in. Like, it just makes a world of difference. It's your manager that you can trust to go on meetings with you, and as a production person, say to your production crew, maybe don't be alone with people in rooms. Go packs of 3 are safer than packs of 2. Because then there is always another side of the story, whether it's true or you're falsely accused or it did actually happen. If there's another witness to what happened, I just don't think the issue would be as great.
Yeah, and walk away from the jobs that you're not comfortable having. I know that's a hard thing to say, but I'm sorry, there's nothing worth it. You gotta live with it for the rest of your life if you make that decision that compromises your values. It's really just that simple, and you can still make it. I mean,
reward good behavior.
Right. Yeah, and I want to say, almost everybody stood up or raised their hand when I asked the question I asked. And yet you're all out here doing good things and moving forward with your life. And I'd like to think most of you didn't compromise yourselves and you walked away from those situations and you got yourself out of those situations, or the next time it happened, you said, fuck you. And that's what you have to be able to do. You just say it to yourself in your head and don't let anybody take advantage of you. Your life is going to be as good as you make it, and you got one chance. Okay? Mm-hmm.
But again, if something, even if you say something like that, somebody might still take advantage of you, right? And that there is nothing that there's nothing that you could say or not say that would make it okay for somebody to sexually abuse or assault you. And so I just want to make sure, because I think that is true. We should all empower ourselves and we should all find our voices. But it's like some of those it's like alcohol and sexual assault, where it's like, yes, I want to have a conversation with my kids about not drinking, but if they get really drunk and somebody rapes them, it's not their fault that happened. And so there's just the sort of like before and after.
Totally agree.
I just always like to point that out.
I think we're going to wrap. We're good?